architect this morning. I am in a little booth in an airport, so the background looks a little different today than you're used to, which is good for variety is the spice of life, right? So today I'm really excited to talk with Leslie. If you saw the promotion for this podcast episode, there's an execution gap that we're going to talk about. So people sit in meetings, they come up with bold plans, and then something happens and it doesn't get executed upon. We're going to dig through that a little bit with Leslie and understand what is it organizationally about us as individuals, about us as teams that don't quite get some of these great bold plans out to into production. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And speaking of that, sometimes it comes down to priorities. I mentioned last week that I was building a free app for a web app for a priority matrix, and it's my adaptation of the Eisenhower matrix. If you use the mobile app, you've seen it, but I wanted to make something available to anybody else, and so it's a web-based app. If you're interested in getting access to that, I launched it this week. I haven't really advertised it. I'd like to see a few users on it before we go really into broader, but it is a free tool. And it will help you with your priority management. So just drop us a note, or I'll put a link into the chats of the podcast. So without further ado, I want to bring Leslie on so we can get to the topic today. I think it's an important one for all businesses. So let's go ahead and bring Leslie on. Hello, Leslie. How are you today?
Good morning, Michael. How are you doing?
Good, doing good. Transitioning back to home from Atlanta, so it's always nice to have that feeling come in.
Very good. Going home is always good.
Yes. And how's springtime in Minneapolis?
Chilly. It was my toes were a little cold taking my new puppy out this morning in flip-flops. Nice. It was a bad call, so I got to get the boots back out by the back door.
That's funny, and a new puppy too. Well, I'm curious. I want you to introduce yourself and talk all about Pinnacle, but tell it. Well, why don't we start there, and then tell us how you got there?
Very good. And so I am a true believer in humanity as an important way to convey. So I'll tell you about Pinnacle, and I'll tell you about myself first. I always start with, who are you? How do you define your family? And what do you do for fun? So you've already mentioned I live in Minneapolis. In addition to a business owner and leader that I'll spend today talking about, I am also consider myself a wife and a boy mom who loves to mountain bike and downhill ski. So just a little context on who I am.
Nice.
But during the majority of my day, I am also blessed to be the leader of a consulting firm, Pinnacle Performance Group here in Minneapolis. And we have a unique place that we play that we've titled Strategic Execution. And the way we describe that is everything that falls between that pure strategy point to the final mile of getting John on the line to understand what is being asked of him in a change. And over the last 15 years, I've really been able to support the organization in developing that niche. Nice. And the way we've done that is really understanding people and using people as the key to execute strategy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, I'm not sure what's going on in Minneapolis, but I think you're our third guest in the 12 months that we've been doing it for more than 12 months, but you're our third guest from Minneapolis for some reason. So that's good.
Very good. It's a good streak.
Yeah, exactly. So that's fantastic. And I love the way you introduce yourself because, we normally say, I'm Michael and I went to so-and-so school, or I do that, you introduced kind of family first. And I think I saw a post that you had a while back that was talking about humanity, and you led with that conversation. What led you to that? Well, I mean, what do you see an absence of humanity in the workplace?
I do. And I think we're trying to evolve, but I think as a broader society, we're trying to figure out how to make that work. I think COVID helped us advance it, but for so long we were expected to be sort of this box, like life was on one side and professionalism was on the other side. And we were expected to show up at work like nothing else was going on in the world around us. We had it all together. You leave it at the door, you come in. And COVID kind of blew that all open, that homeschool is going on behind you. You've got dogs barking and kids screaming. But I think we sort of got that physically in seeing the world around us. But I think sometimes emotionally, we don't understand the connections between people and spend that little extra time to understand each other and show up as whole individuals in the work context.
Yeah, you said something there that I think I've, as you can tell by the gray hair, I've been around the business world for some time, but that leave it at the door. I couldn't tell you the number of times I've heard that, especially early in the career, right? As you're
Mhm.
coming up, it was part of the culture to teach you that whatever was going on outside, you don't bring it in the walls, and that's and you're right. That has kind of crumbled down, I think, and COVID was a big element of it. But I also think there's just uh, some well-run businesses that set good examples as well. Do you see that in your business?
I I do. I think it's quite a variety. I think so much of it is tied to organizational culture,
Yeah.
um, and a fear of doing things differently.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's true. So let's talk about your consulting business for a while, because I think it sets us up for talking about that execution gap. So, who is an ideal customer? Why do they call you guys? What problems are you helping them with?
So we are unique in that we don't say we work in a specific industry or for
Okay,
specific type of people. I guess this is sort of where our cultural thread runs through. We work for good people, so that is our number one thing: is looking for good humans. But
that's
it's
great. I
really
love that.
in working with organizations where people is a key part of the value chain. And so as we're thinking about the space between the shorthand is after you get the PowerPoint, then what do you do with it?
Yeah,
So often people are the connector in that space. And
yeah,
so we are looking for organizations that are operationally oriented. People are a huge part of the value chain strategy and translated off the paper or off the screen into the areas around us.
yeah.
And beneficially, that can span organizations. We've chosen to be flexible in our model, that we work from companies of $10 million up to Fortune 100 organizations across a variety of industries. The key thing is
Yeah.
really having people as a key part of the value chain.
That's fantastic, and it's interesting because when I think about what you're saying there, there are no shortage of ideas a lot of times, right? You get into a meeting with your team, you get into a broader meeting, or just two individuals talking. There's always a lot of ideas, and realizing not every idea is the right idea, but it's an interesting thing culturally, how ideas take it from that light bulb going on to where they decide that they want to execute that. So some companies have a very interesting innovation management plan, and you see that in their outputs because they're innovative companies. Some maybe don't have a structured process, but do you start at that ideation into the business, or are you getting focused when it's execution time?
We are getting focused when it's time to sort of put pen to paper in terms of clarity. So I always say
Okay.
we do not do pure strategy work. We do not do the ideation. We do not identify the white spaces.
Okay.
But once an organization has that understanding, sometimes we do go in and help them clarify. Okay, we know where we want to go, but we need to actually put pen to paper and write that down.
Yeah.
And it can be all the way there through the final execution.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And then what's interesting about it to me is I've tended to work in small to medium sized organizations, mostly software companies that were on a fast path to growth. And there was different events along the way, 7 exits, something like that, which is just insane. But the I saw so many good ideas die, and
Yeah.
it wasn't that people in the room didn't agree that it was a good idea, but just where you're talking about the clarity and then how to act on it, is that sounds like that's where you guys really focus. So
That
why do I just maybe top three reasons why those ideas never made it to fruition?
Well, sometimes they shouldn't, and I think that is a key
Yeah.
point that not enough companies do. Is just if you try and it doesn't work, kill it. So I would say it's not always a bad thing.
Okay.
But we talk about, in my background, I came from McKinsey and worked in the strategy space. And strategy is the sexy, glamorous thing where you're getting the play to the board, and the big ideas is what seems glamorous. And then the people who are thinking of those big ideas say, "Okay, I did all the hard work, just go do it," and they turn
Mm,
it over. And I think it's the lack of empathy and understanding of the complexity of operations,
yeah.
and the choices that are made in each and every layer of an organization, that really is often where those ideas fall down.
Yeah.
And our organization, a little tangent, we started out as a training firm in the restaurant business, in the quick
Ah,
service restaurant business. And I go to that because I think it's a super interesting industry. If you have an industry where you could have thousands of outlets with turnover as 100% every year, and if you make the product wrong, you could kill people. And yet these organizations are making us hamburgers and coffee on a regular basis that's fairly consistent. And the reason that is absolute utter clarity in operational procedures. And it was that some of that insight as we moved out of sort of the restaurant retail space into these broader organizations that they get an idea and then they just say, go do it. But they haven't spent the time to actually define what it is. And that is the place that we have seen is the big opportunity. And it's hard and it's not fun and it's ticky-tacky.
Yeah.
But it has to be done for execution to happen.
And does a lot of this happen, this execution gap happen because the things are hard? I mean, I've been a part of many conversations in the executive leadership team that say, that's a good idea, go do that. Mary, you're in charge, go make that happen. And then Mary goes and tries to do the things and it's, oh, finance has an objection, or maybe sales says, oh, that's never going to work. And it just doesn't catch on. I mean, how do you prevent that? Or is there a starting point that's different that people need to think about?
I think it's getting a common fact base. I have a background as an engineer, so every now and then that flares itself in my current work. Of people will say that's not going to work or this isn't going to work. And one of the key tools that we like to use in that sort of place is like, let's get it on paper. What is it? So for example, we're working right now with a client we have a huge process map that takes up almost a whole wall of everyone would say, we can't do this, or this is this way and that way. And they talk past each other. But when you start to get facts on the table and you say, okay, what would have to be true to move, the order of these sequences or provide this information, sometimes it's just getting a clear fact base for us to have discussions around.
Yeah, and we can talk about it a little later, but what I love about that is that's true in all of us, right? Even individually. If you say that you're going to become a marathoner, and then you realize the amount of time that you can't just say I'm going to be a marathoner and just go out for a run, right? You've got to start planning your diet, your training schedule, all these things, and that's exactly what you're saying. As a team, you've got to have that documented, because only then can you really address each step in it, right?
Absolutely. In addition to that, I think. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the other thing is this idea that I've done the hard thinking at the strategy level, so just do it is, I think, in a lot of organizations, culturally, it feels like that is less than work or it's obvious work. What happens then when you pass that down the chain is you really do have key strategic choices that are getting made very far away from the knowledge base. So if you don't clarify exactly what all those trade-offs are, your front line is going to get things done, but at the expense of what if you're not clear?
And so that's an interesting thing. Because there is that, just go do it. You got it. You're in charge. Go do it. Right. And is there a method that you guys that has a check down list that says, hey, we want to go do that, but we went and talked to the front line and it turns out that here's the circumstances, and it comes back to the leadership team to say, you've got some weighted decisions to make.
It is that it really is getting through that gate of getting the clarity and the facts to make choices. And that's where sometimes people are like, I don't want to do this. Like, why are you making look at this? And at some point, either you need to truly be comfortable empowering your organization to make the choices, or you have to get into the details.
Yeah. And do you see a difference in I don't know if these are good examples. Let's say somebody decides they're going to do a pricing change on that burger, right? Or maybe it's a longer transformation that somebody's going to implement an AI platform to do X. Is the duration of the project or the mission of the idea, how does that affect execution?
I would say significantly. I think it is. Execution is usually and change sometimes are synonymous. And I think one of the biggest challenges we see is not understanding an organization's capacity for change, and thinking about not just what is the individual change I want to push, but viewing change from the end user and what is the collective of change coming at that end user right now? And do they have, is your change the priority? Do they have capacity for one more? And really getting that end user perspective in our opinion. I mean, business results drive prioritization,
Yep.
but ultimate execution success, we really have to think about the end user capacity as well.
Yeah, yeah, and so by the way, if anybody's wants to ask a question of Leslie, please drop it in the comments or chat section, and we'll address them as they come in. So Leslie, one of the you had a post not too long ago that was about humanity and putting kind of the human back into the companies and things like that. And while I do want to get back to talking about the structural thing about execution, but I think that's a big thing that I don't want to overstep. So where does humanity show up in a good way, and where would it not show up where it should be?
Just bringing that up just brings so many emotions into me. So I think I posted that, as I said, I live in Minneapolis, and during the ice siege here in January, I think it was a very real thing as a leader to face that. I had employees coming in who one of my employees' daughters was there for the murder of Renee Good and witnessed the shooting. And she ran towards the woman as she was dying in her car. And having that mom come into my office and carry that burden, that's when you can't leave it at the door. Right. I mean, I had a team meeting that day, and, we want to talk about, here's the projects that are in the pipeline. And we just had to stop and say, I mean, this is crazy. This is nuts. People are terrified of letting their kids go to school. And I think it was a real reckoning as a leader of what's the line of humanity. And for me personally, I always try to have a very apolitical point of view at work. I'm like, we can bring our whole selves, we can talk about everything, but we don't do politics, hard stop. And trying to have that conversation in a way that didn't feel political. And I actually had one of my employees come and give me some feedback and said, you don't need to apologize. This isn't politics. These are, we're talking about our kids and our friends, and that's just humanity. And I think for me, it was a push by my team to be bolder in maybe feeling what I felt like was the margin for really recognizing what was going on around it. And my role as a leader to create a space for our team to fully show up with everything that they were carrying.
Yeah. And how does that, then there's a lot we could talk about there, especially internally, but what about externally? I mean, your business is customer facing, right? You have people that are either training or documenting processes or whatever all your teams do in a customer scenario. So how do you handle situations like that when you're a customer?
It starts at the top. We work with good people. We have a rule. I'll say it on here. We don't work with jerks. And it's a hard and fast rule. And if people don't believe in the values that we believe as an organization, we don't work with them. We believe our rule is take care of yourself, take care of your family, do good work in that order. And we truly believe that if you're doing the first two things, you will do better work. But on the flip side, that also extends to our client teams. I had once where I had a client, she was under a big deadline, and she had 2 kids with COVID, and she was just overwhelmed. And I said, what do you have to get done tonight? I called our team. We all sat online. We cranked it out, because those beliefs don't just extend to us. They extend to our clients. And I think that is the thing we've gotten feedback on, is actually leading and creating a space where people can be human and can think about humanity that extends to them, just creates a different sort of team environment and really results in better work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. And you said something there that you don't work with jerks. I love that. And I think small businesses in particular, well, maybe large businesses too, there is a reason to fire your customers sometimes, right? If they're abusive, if they're just generally bring down the morale of the team because they're just being ugly about it, or it's just not a right market fit, right? What you provide is not what they need, and vice versa. And sometimes it's upon the vendor or the partner to say, hey, this isn't working for either party, so we need to stop, right? But that's a hard thing to do, especially because you may have a CEO saying we've got to hit the numbers and things like that. So how how does an account team come to you and say, I'm having trouble with this customer? And how do you walk them through what may be a departure or maybe not, right?
I will say I think we've only had 1 or 2 departures ever in our history. But oftentimes when there's a challenge, I think so much of it is you can start to explore with a couple rules. One is assume everyone is acting with good intent. If we start by that gating rule, if we don't work with jerks, then we're assuming people are working with good intentions. I had a team recently was like, the client's not getting back to us. They're not getting us any feedback. They're not engaging. And then we had to talk through like, are they intentionally doing that to you, or is there something else going on? Well, in fact, there was something else going on, that they were launching a huge initiative. And so then saying, okay, let's just call it out and say what it is. Like, we can't be our best partner when we don't get engagement from you and you guys are busy. So we agreed to pause things for 6 weeks so that we could both come back and do it the right way. And I think that is also, though, that means for us as an organization, we're deferring revenue, but knowing that that's okay if it ends with the right answer, that it's going to pay back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I love that, because even personally, we never know what that person we're talking to is going through at that moment in time. And we've been conditioned to leave it at the door, right? And so even in personal one-on-one conversations, sometimes you don't know what that person's going through. So I love that empathy approach to it. And so that I like. Let me get back on track with some of the execution gap things. Because this is a habit architect, we talk about building good structure that allows a habit to be successful, because a lot of times people, like we talked about that marathon example, maybe they're not in an environment that marathon is not in their cards right now. Maybe something else is important more important. So as an organization, what are some of the key things that need to be in place to be known for executing against your strategic initiatives?
I think clarity, focus, and tenacity would be the 3 things I would say. So clarity is, a strategy might be, I'm going to be a marathon runner. Clarity is knowing, how much you're going to increase your mileage every week, and when are you planning your long runs, and having a plan, like you said. Structure is, I'm going to run every morning. So for organizations, if they're trying to implement a strategic plan, it's not just what's the big idea, but like, hey, here's how I'm going to break it down. Here's what I'm going to do this quarter. Here's what I'm going to do this month. And then having a way to report out and check in on that. And tenacity is that grit of, this is not, we're not talking rocket science in most of the work we're doing. It's just, some of it's a slog, and it's the recognition that that is just a fact. And I think also the organizational celebration of not always giving the recognition to the people who did the bright, shiny ideas, but also recognizing the people who slogged through the hard execution details to get it done.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. I love that framework because there's so much applicability to it. And it really it made me think, I don't know why, but of the Apollo 13 concept, right? When they were at risk of losing some astronauts, and they said, here's the objective, and then they kind of worked back with clarity how they were going to execute, right? And that's, now maybe your project isn't as dramatic as that, but to execute with that precision is really that can be done with anybody, right?
Yes. Absolutely. It's just exactly. It's knowing exactly what you have to do, and then figuring out how to work within those confines.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have and you don't have to name the customer, do you have a customer story that's just, this is exactly how they went from doing it badly and then doing it really well, that you can walk us through?
I think a couple of different, we have a client that we've been working with for a couple of years now, came in with a new, and I don't know if I would say they were doing it badly, but just had a CEO, new leadership team, trying to bring a whole bunch of different businesses together. And they were trying to build the muscle around execution and being focused. Everyone was, in this sense, it was really at the strategic level. Everyone was focused on fighting the fires and getting the work done. But how did they build that muscle around, from a strategy perspective, growing and expanding? And for them, it was first dedicating the time to all get on the same page. So it wasn't just about what are we going to do, but really going back into bringing a dozen organizations together and first listening. on what matters to each of them, and then coming together with a common vision for the future and objective that brought that history along. So I think setting a really strong foundation team was a key piece. Secondly, then it was clear on exactly what had happened. And from a leadership team, knowing identifying those things. So again, this is somewhat of a strategic planning example. So getting very clear, but I think when it gets into the execution, it's the chunking it out and the following up. So as they went through their processes, I kind of skipped over launch. One of the key things is often, how do you communicate what you're trying to do to different people in their language? So they spend a lot of time on not just this is what we want to do, but how do we talk about it to each level? And then really thinking about those rituals and routines. So who's got the responsibility for figuring it out? And how do they bring it together month after month, quarter after quarter, to really get it done? And I think it is that, as you talk about habits, it is that ritual and consistency that gets you to results, versus just having big aspirations.
Exactly. And by the way, we've just got a comment, and I'll read the comment to you because it's great. It says, "Love what you're doing, Leslie. Thanks for sharing." And that's from Baba Bhatti, who I know. He is a founder of Dallas AI organization, which is this phenomenal organization he and his partner have built, and he's one of the best at executing how to train organizations on AI. So I wanted to ask you about that somewhere in this conversation. Maybe this is a good time to pin it, since he offered up a comment to you. But first, he loves what you're sharing, and thanks for doing that. So pat yourself on the back for that. And then the AI is here. I mean, it's everywhere. And what's interesting about it is you can read an article of fear, that it's going to replace all white collar jobs, and you can read an article that it's scary because it steals your privacy or what have you. And there's all sorts of that. And there's also the good stories of, it helped me do my job more efficiently. It helped the company achieve certain milestones because we were able to see things we couldn't see before. So this is one of those shifts in business, right? There's good and there's bad, and there's fear and there's anxiety about it. How do you address something like that? If somebody comes to you and says, we know we need to implement this because we're going to be better for it, but we've got an organization that's a little hesitant to adopt.
First, and we've worked with many who are implementing sort of AI solutions, is being really clear on the why and the WIFM. People in the circles know WIFM is the what's in it for me. So how do we craft the story of why we're doing this, and how does it impact and potentially benefit the people who are going to be impacted by the change? And I think in that aspect, there is an element of honesty that's required. We do know that AI is changing the workforce and is going to change how people's jobs are going to happen. And I think there's a fine line for leaders on that topic to balance that the work is going to change, but people are not going to go away. And so, at least not all people. But I think in each leader situation, they need to be really transparent and honest as much as they can about the impact to their organization, because honesty goes so much farther than fake good news.
Yeah, and you've said that you've been very consistent, so it's starting to get in my head. Clarity, and that clarity is not only with yourselves but with your team. And then you set a playground to go. I don't know if playground is right yet. The field to go execute, right? So that's fantastic. So let's tie this back to habits. We're getting to the bottom of the hour, and we try to get in the 30. And by the way, I apologize for all the alerts. I thought I turned off the alerts. If you heard those, I keep getting text and notes and stuff like that. But my apology. I usually try to subdue those. But if you did hear them, I didn't mean to distract. So let's talk about habits. So you covered a couple of broader categories of habits that will help you be successful. And I'm wondering, as individuals, what can we do as individuals to bring humanity to the workforce or the workplace? And as we lead projects, maybe we're not the CEO, but we're responsible for executing some piece of the strategic plan. What are the habits that we can think about that will help us stay grounded or stay positive, et cetera?
I have so many thoughts here.
Good.
And I think I have kind of one on each side. So I would say from a business perspective, the number one habit I would recommend to folks is be really clear on the problem you're trying to solve.
Yep.
And what does success look like, and write it down. My team has heard me say that so many times, because you can sit in a room and talk about it and all think you're agreeing, but it's not until you put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard that you all see the words written on a page that you might,
Yep.
oh, that's not exactly how I saw it. I thought it this way. And that simple activity of writing it down, whether it be, we talked about a process map and having that clarity, or the problem to solve, that can go a really, really long way. So that is one of my favorite habits
Yep.
in terms of
Yep.
driving clarity. The other thing that I always say is, like, just be honest about what you suck at and where do you look for help. So as we
Yeah.
think about teaming, I always say I
Yep.
try to create a place where I wanted to work. And there are some things that I have great gifts in, and there are just some things I suck at. And I think as a team, we've been able to be much more effective developing the habit to be
Yep.
transparent and honest about those things. And, look, we call them, we talk about our superpowers. Look to me when you need this. And this is not what I'm great at. And I'm going to come to other person on my team for the practice, of really knowing what you're good at and where you're not the best, is another piece that we found has been really important within our organization.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I was having dinner the other night with the client, and he said he loves getting in a data room and reading through the data and reading all this stuff. And I was thinking, that is the last thing I want to do. But you know what? That's what makes everything work, is you've got people that do enjoy the data, or do enjoy the process side of it, or something like that. So if you're not honest about it, then you're never going to know, and you're going to kind of drudge through it, and you may not be happy, and the output might be affected, right? And meanwhile, there's somebody around the corner that would love to do that part of the job, right?
So exactly.
Yeah, that's great news. By the way, somebody said they agree with the what's in it for why are you doing it, and the honesty factor. So that was yes. A good comment as well. So very good. So now let's talk about Leslie. You mentioned mountain biking, which I am a recovering mountain biker. I used to love it, but I broke a collarbone in many places, so I decided now I ride on flat roads, but I still ride. You also talked about being a boy mom, etc. So what are Leslie's go-to habits that you have to, that number one, you don't do a day without it, and then number two, just in general, how do you handle all that?
No, my number one is sleep. Sleep is my non-negotiable, hands down. It impacts everything. And so I will bend over backwards to preserve my sleep. So that is my number one. I would say my number two habit is trying to just get movement in my life. And I say movement intentionally versus exercise. My boys are almost 4 and almost 10. And so, like, it's a little crazy. My days of getting to go do things on a regular basis, like go to the gym, aren't as great as they used to be. But having that time to breathe some fresh air and get outside and take a walk, I think is just so important. And I know if I do the sleep and the movement, all the rest of it I can get through.
Yep. Yeah, that's fantastic. My three with the movement is movement, moderation, and meditation. So that's kind of how I try to fit that into my day. So very good. Leslie, thank you so much for sharing this. This is such an important topic. I love the humanity aspect of it. I'm really pleased when I start seeing that showing up in our customers, or our just our relationships, hearing with peers that are stories like that. So it's something that I really appreciate that you're out pushing. And if somebody wanted to engage with you directly or with your firm, what's the best way for them to locate you guys?
Our website is www.pinnacleconnection.com. And you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. And so really always look for the opportunity to engage with folks, and we always say, we'll put as much good karma into the world as we can. So questions or connections, just always happy to build a network with.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And we're having a little technical issue, but great advice. Do reach out to Leslie on LinkedIn or her website, and as well as if you have comments about this session when you watch it on your stream, whatever platform you do make comments, like it, share it with other people, especially if you have a leader in your organization that you think that might need to hear what Leslie's talking about. Please do share it with everybody on your list. So thanks again, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for listening in this week. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.